press this button.
Running my
So
phone.
nice to meet you. Thanks for taking the time.
No, I do. It's not.
Yeah, and this is my colleague Emma, who's
I am.
as well.
I'm fine.
Emma, nice to meet you.
Is this where I'm supposed to go? OH?
I was telling her
She's got
about
guarantee
all
if
of the
you
Ohio
say it.
things. All you have to do, walk into a restaurant, do anything She will be. Sure. You know, whatever. Okay. I think she wants him for when Mr. Neal, if he decides to give the presentation, and then she may have you help pass them out. Okay? Okay? You okay? Okay.
Basically, and I need you to just submit it for the record.
Just right? Okay.
Yep. Okay. So, attendees,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
I like that pink hat.
Yeah, it matched the whole ensemble. That was
That's good. Hey?
George, how are you? Wow.
We're really,
Yeah.
the subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Tax Policy Hearing, Tax Reform and Small Businesses, Growing Our Economy and Creating Jobs. Today we will continue our series of tax reform hearings into how the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is providing economic growth. Our focus today is on tax reform is affecting those Main Street businesses, which create most of the jobs in this country and which invest in our local communities. Last year, we passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act to reform our tax code into one that's built for growth. We lowered tax rates across the board for individuals, small businesses, and corporations. We introduced full and immediate expensing for most capital-intensive firms of all sizes, and we enacted provisions for small businesses such as expanded availability for cash accounting and flexibility for choosing between pass-throughs and corporate taxation. These reforms benefit all businesses, big, small, and create an economic opportunity that has spurred the economic growth. We're seeing results already. Back in 2016, CBO projected that the GDP growth in 2018 would slow from 2.3% in the first quarter down to 2.1% in the fourth quarter. Now after growing 2.9% in the first quarter of 2018, GDP growth is projected to accelerate to 3.3% in the fourth quarter. At the same time, unemployment forecasts are being revised down. For example, CBO expects the unemployment rate to drop to 3.5% by the end of the year. It will be the lowest unemployment rate since 1969. And that's not all. Investment growth is exceeding expectation. Just last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that capital spending by firms in the S&P 500 grew by 24% in the first quarter of 2018, the fastest pace since 2011, and the best first quarter since 1995. Recent data on small businesses is encouraging. The National Federation for Independent Businesses reported small business profits at a 45-year record high. The percentage of small businesses that are expanding their employment is at the highest level since 1999. And the percentage of small business reporting plans for expansion, increased hiring, and higher wages is at a near record high. Now we want to hear from small business owners themselves and how tax reform is helping them grow their operation and invest in their workers and local communities. We have a fantastic panel of witnesses before us today, including several current owners of small and medium-sized businesses. I look forward to all of your testimony. I now yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Doggett, for the purposes of an opening statement.
Well, thank you very much. It would have been great if we could have heard from small businesses last year when this tax law was being written. That would have been a far better time when we might have actually had some impact on the contents of the law. Unfortunately, small businesses, like so many other taxpayers, academics, and experts in this area, were all cut out of the process when a decision was made to rush this bill through without any public hearings. Now we today, like last week, basically have a public relations exercise to try to put the best face on legislation that was designed to provide a windfall for Wall Street banks and for multinationals, and for whom small businesses were basically an afterthought. If the length of this hearing were designed to reflect the portion of this tax bill that really benefits small businesses, we would need to conclude right now before you even testify. For small business owners, we have basically a tax bait and switch. After dressing up the pass-through provisions as a big help for mom and pop small businesses, we've learned that almost half of the overall benefits from this particular provision go to those who make more than $1 million per year. And within a few years, 2/3 of the pass-through small businesses will be left with a mere 4% of the benefits, while more than half of it will go to those making at least $1 million each year. For too many here in Congress, small business seems to be, well, the kind of enterprise Donald Trump runs. Not so many employees, a real estate mogul. And while continuing to hide his personal tax returns and those for his 500 pass-through entities that may well have benefited significantly from this travesty, we find tucked into the provisions of the final tax bill, tucked in from the conference committee, even though neither the House nor Senate considered them, a special provision tailor-made for real estate operations similar to what Trump does. Few employees, but a significant amount of depreciable property. As one recent study concluded, for small businesses, the new pass-through deduction is, quote, unlikely to generate enough tax savings to hire new employees or make significant operational improvements our capital investments. Indeed, a recent survey of small businesses, another one, found that for about 7 in 10, nothing in the new tax law will result in the hiring of new employees. Small businesses, I think, deserve a level playing field. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers. Unfortunately, that's exactly what this tax law did. Since the recession, we know that small businesses have created 2 of every 3 private sector jobs. But the focus of this new tax law was to see how much more help we can provide to large multinational corporations. Most of the small businesses that I deal with in Texas can't afford an offshore tax haven, don't have a jillion offshore subsidiaries. It's just not fair when Pfizer, which has 157 subsidiaries and tax havens, pays such a much lower rate than the corner pharmacy, even though it's Pfizer that especially needs national security and the economy, the infrastructure, the education that America provides it. We've recently learned how one multinational plans to use the windfall it got from this tax law. Since September of 2017, when Speaker Ryan visited a Harley-Davidson plant up in Wisconsin to tout the gold at the end of the corporate tax break rainbow, what have we learned about Harley-Davidson? Well, it shuttered its plant, it laid off 350 people, it showered its wealthy shareholders with $700 million in stock buybacks, and it's opening a new factory in Thailand, a factory that will benefit from a new provision, a new incentive for offshoring jobs. So I'm eager to hear from you. I'm sure that there are some exceptions to the rule that we'll hear about today. I think overall, every small business, including those that might have had some immediate benefit from this bill, will find themselves facing more difficulty with access to capital. When I visit with small businesses, they want to become bigger businesses, and often one of the obstacles is access to capital. Well, with more than $2 trillion in debt here being added to the deficit, we're already seeing some increase in interest rates, and we will continue, according to most objective observers, to see that rise in interest rates as so much public debt begins to squeeze out access to private capital. That's the wrong direction, but we look forward to your insights regarding this new law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We will hear from 5 witnesses today. I would like to recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Smith, to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it is my pleasure to introduce Larry Gray from the great state of Missouri and from the even greater community, my hometown of Salem. Larry runs a small CPA firm in Rolla, Missouri, and is one of the leading CPAs not only in my district, but across the country. He's well published, having written hundreds of articles in professional journals, and has served and continues to serve on many IRS boards and professional organizations. Larry is a highly sought out speaker traveling the country to teach tax law to other CPAs. Larry is also a farmer. In fact, his farm is very close to my farm in our hometown. Being a CPA and a farmer puts Larry in a very unique position to talk about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, how it is helping family farmers and rural communities. I'm just grateful that he took time out of his busy schedule to be here. Please welcome Larry Gray.
Next, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Renacci, to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to have a business from my district represented here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Mike Bach, President and CEO of Philpot Solutions Group, Inc. Philpot is a small local industrial company whose core competency involves fabricated customized rubber parts. Northeast Ohio relies heavily on industrial manufacturers such as Philpot, so I'm glad Mike is here to represent Philpot and other small businesses in Northeast Ohio. Thank you for being here, Mike, and welcome.
Now I'd like to introduce our next witness, someone I've known and had the privilege of knowing for many years, John Horn. John is the owner of Anna Maria Oyster Bar in my home district of Manatee County. John is a veteran of the hospitality industry in Manatee County for more than 40 years. One of the neat things about John, he's He's wore shorts to work every day for the last 25 years. I asked John, why didn't you bring the shorts today? He said, well, it's not quite dignified. So how you can be on vacation and make money, I find that pretty interesting. He began his career as a busboy on Anna Maria Island, working for a small chain of restaurants. Then in 1996, after 10 years of working his way up the ladder, he took a leap and opened his own business and his own restaurant. Anna Maria Oyster Bar is now, he has 4 locations with 330 employees where they serve great food to family-friendly environment. Also, he's very active in giving back in the community through youth and education. Thank you for being here, John. We appreciate the opportunity. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, for the purpose of introducing the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to welcome with us today Phil Holman to the Ways and Means Subcommittee hearing this morning. Phil is President and CEO of Loram Maintenance of Way, which is headquartered in my district in Hamel, Minnesota. And Loram is a major railroad maintenance and service provider with 1,200 employees across the country. And Mr. Chairman, I'm looking forward to hearing Phil's testimony this morning as he explains how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has positively impacted Loram's employees, their operations, and their plans for the future. And so I yield back.
Finally, John Esmeyer is a founder and chief executive officer of Small Business Majority. I want to welcome all of you here today. The committee has received your written statements, and they will be made part of the formal hearing record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to deliver your oral remarks. We'll begin with Mr. Gray when you're ready. Can you hit your mic there? There's a little...
Don't let it, is that okay?
That's good, thank you.
Great. Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Mr. Doggett, fellow members of the committee. I actually come from a very humble upbringing.
Yeah, pull it closer.
Pull it closer.
There you go.
Okay. My father had a 6th-grade education. He worked in his father's sawmill. Both my grandfathers owned sawmills. And throughout my father's life, he was a pig farmer. My mother had an 8th-grade education. She was not allowed to go to school beyond the 8th grade, but could work at a local riverfront cafe at the age of 12. Then she went to work in a shoe factory and finished her career in her mid-70s, managing nearly 100 women in a garment factory. What these 2 people instilled in me was a work ethic. My father said, work hard, and he set an example for me to follow. My mother said, get an education, one that you can take and make a difference, and having your own business. I tell you this because from these experiences, I've learned life is not always fair nor easy. Neither is being a small business. At the age of 10, I started mowing and raking hay for local farmers at 1.5 cents per bale. The following summer, I knew that I could make more money. To do this, I need to hire help. I put together my first hay crew at the age of 11. The going rate at the time was 10 cents a bale to haul the hay from the field to the barn. I paid my high school hay crew, someone had to be old enough to drive the truck, 2 cents per bale that summer, and I did make more money. That was my first personal experience with small business and employees. My address has not changed since I was 4. Today I own a cattle farm running about 300 cow-calf pairs, including 85 acres that has been in the family for over 100 years. My children and grandchildren live and work on that farm. My grandchildren represent a 5th-generation small business. I give you this background so that you can see I'm from the real world, where small business is really small and typically a family affair. What I see now in small business arena in rural Missouri is a general sense of economic optimism. I'm seeing more clients who are borrowing money to start a business, to expand a business, or to bring in partners, likely family members. On behalf of the small business, I would like to thank you, Congress, for this new opportunity to have you as a partner. The business provisions in the Tax Cut and Job Act says America is investing in small business. Because of the 20% deduction, lower individual rates, corporate tax rates 21%, not 35%, and depreciation and expensing options, small business is set to expand. My employees' taxes should be very simple, maybe free file. The law allows small business to get a 20% deduction without complication. AMT is a much more burdensome process and impacts more of my small business clients than will be the 20% deduction over the phase-out threshold. Most small businesses in rural Missouri will fall under the threshold amount, so calculations will be more straightforward. If there's been one true pain point in my small business over the past few years, it is health insurance. My health insurance has gone up exponentially under the Affordable Care. I'm not alone. Many of my small business clients are experiencing the same thing. To the extent many of them no longer have health insurance, finding that paying the penalty is more affordable than Affordable Care. I'm especially seeing that in the 50 to 65-year-old small business clients. Even factoring in the ACA burden, I personally know that if I can make the same money as I made last year with less tax, it will allow me the security of my business planning to expand. As I add one employee here and one employee there in my small companies, I know that my business is growing. In the small business community, that creates an attitude, which becomes a conversation, and small business will grow. In closing, I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this hearing. On behalf of small business throughout America, I thank you and the legislative process for good legislation. There will be corrections and interpretations like any other legislation of this size. In this process, I believe small business will look at the intent of the new tax law as Congress cares about us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Mr. Bach, you're recognized.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to come in and speak with you this morning. My name is Mike Bach, and I've served as the President and CEO of the Philpot Solutions Group since September 2009. We're headquartered in Northeast Ohio, where we've remained since our founding in 1889 by John W. Philpot. I will retire at our annual shareholders meeting on the 7th, which is almost exactly 2 weeks from this moment. I'm very much looking forward to it. During my time, our team more than tripled the size of Philpot through creative domestic market expansion. Although Philpot's best days are still ahead, I'm confident that we are handing off to Dr. Jim Vaughn an even better version of what was already a great Philpot when it was entrusted to me and my team. 129 years ago, Mr. Philpot walked his wooden cart around Cleveland's industrial area, selling his custom fabricated rubber goods, many of which remain in our core competency. Perseverance and remaining true to Mr. Philpot's customer-centric vision guided our company through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and all too many recessions. Philpot currently employs 40 people who also own the company. This came about in 1977 when no one in the Philpot family wanted to run the company. They sold Philpot to its employees using an employee stock ownership plan, more commonly referred to as an ESOP. Each year, we're permitted to contribute up to 25% of an employee's compensation into his or her ESOP account to a maximum of just over $50,000. The cash accumulates in each employee's ESOP account, which is then used to purchase the shares of fellow employees at retirement. This process assures a near perpetual employee ownership of Philpot. Having equity in the company has proven to motivate our employees and ensure the best-in-class customer service. We continue to sell our legacy polymeric parts for industrial applications. Like with other industries in the late 1990s, rubber molders fell into the allure of low labor and tax cost in China. When we were told by one of our largest customers, you can either join us in our move to China or we'll find someone that will, our choice was clear. We formed contract relationships with manufacturers of 3 rubber molders in the Shanghai area, and ultimately it forced the closing of our USA factory in 2003. Parts in China were at least 25% less expensive than ours in the USA, despite the added transportation cost and the added China contractor's margin. However, quality issues grew, which strained our management and financial resources, and eventually rose to a level where key customer retention was in jeopardy. At about the same time, our technical team had a rubber compound re-engineering breakthrough that reduced cycle time for producing parts and thus closing the gap with the China labor cost. At the same time, a more business-friendly environment had emerged in Ohio as a result of its Common Sense initiative, where unnecessarily overburdensome rules were modified or rescinded. After weighing the alternatives, we swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and mustered the courage to invest more than $5 million to buy and upgrade a 40,000 square foot facility in Aurora, Ohio, and equip it with brand new rubber molding equipment. Although we have a solid plan to eventually be able to match the global cost, this new venture has risk. However, the alternative of not having customers made the decision crystal clear. Our reshoring process is a bit more challenging than we first anticipated. However, the revenue miss from our plan has been backfilled nicely by the current vibrant economy, which we attribute to tax reform. We've already created 6 jobs and have plans for 15 to 20 more over the next 3 to 5 years. As specific benefits to tax reform, we gave every employee a $1,500 bonus in December, in addition to the bonus that they'll also receive. Our business has grown significantly in 2018 because we sell to other manufacturers, not end users. We usually outperform the market, and as an example, we benefit numerous times in the steel area where it's used for durable goods. We participate 5 different times in the supply chain. So tax reform is helping not only us, but our customers and our businesses growing, and for this we thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan and Ranking Member Doggett and members of the committee. I appreciate the invitation to be here today to share how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has affected my restaurant in Florida. In advance of my testimony today, I was asked for a resume to introduce myself, but I haven't had a resume since my senior year of college at Clemson University, and I only had it then because it was part of my coursework. I've never used a resume to get a job because I started as a busboy in a seafood restaurant on Anna Maria Island while on summer break. I stayed with that small independent business for 10.5 years and helped the owner open 5 more restaurants. Then I opened my own restaurant, a little 85-seat oyster bar on the Anna Maria City Pier. 21 years later, I have 4 restaurants in Manatee County with 333 employees who earn $5 million annually. We serve between 700 and 1,000 meals at each of our restaurants every day of the year. I know every industry thinks theirs is the best, the most important industry in the country, but ours actually is. 1 out of 3 Americans got their first job in the hospitality industry. Our industry isn't just a first job, it's a career. Of our 300 hourly staff members, no one is paid minimum wage once they finish their training. Our hourly staff earn between $10 and $30 an hour. 1/3 are students working as bussers, hosts, food runners, etc. They earn between $10 and $12.50 an hour. Not bad for a high school kid looking for date money. I assume the high school kids are still trying to get date monies for their first jobs. Almost 50% of our hourly staff earn $15 to $30 per hour. Our annual FICA payments were over $552,000, matched with the employees' payments. That's over $1.1 million our small business contributed to Social Security. Small businesses are big businesses. I know this committee often works with much larger numbers, but to a little guy like me, that's a huge number. I paid my accountant just over $29,000 last year to file my taxes. 4 restaurants, 5 pass-through S-Corps, 2 LLCs, and my personal returns, the largest one there. I have a BS in administrative management, but I do not remember learning how to read a return or how to understand the tax code. So to this end, I appreciate this committee's efforts to simplify the tax code. What my CPA did explain to me, though, was the part of the new Tax Cuts and Job Act where I get a 20% business income deduction starting this year. He showed me what my 2017 taxes would have been with the pass-through deduction. So I've already planned 2018. What will I do with the 20% deduction that the new Tax Cuts and Job Acts will provide? There's so many options. Some I've already taken. After the chat with my CPA, I bonused $60,000 to some of our staff. I've purchased 2 new efficient LED signs at $20,000 each to attract new customers. Speaking of reinvesting in our business, which we all have to do to remain viable in our industry, we're looking forward to working with Congress on a critical technical correction on the depreciation timing of restaurants. Our faculties suffer excessive wear and tear due to the volume of guests and equipment upgrades necessary. We need the 15-year depreciation returned for these improvements, and bonus depreciation would be nice too. I know you are all aware of this technical error and are working hard to make the correction. We need to get the depreciation back to 15 years as soon as possible so we can keep investing our dollars back into our business. Cash flow is very important in restaurants as we operate on very, very small margins. We're seasonal in Florida, but what I've noticed that many of us in our area have noticed is that business is up. The seasonality is not near what it used to be. Our guest counts are up. People are eating out more. People have confidence in our economy. Many of the local restaurateurs are raving about guest counts and business staying up year-round. Everyone's feeling the effects of a stimulated economy. Monday, I spoke to my friend John Rice, who owns an appliance business near one of our restaurants. He told me his business was up 60% in the first quarter of this year. He had his first $1 million month ever. I do believe that confidence in our economy is showing tremendously. John is selling durable goods in his store, and an incoming tide raises all boats. Even here in D.C., my buddy Mike Finnerty, a 26-year veteran bartender at the Old Ebbitt Grill, told me in April that his sales and his take-home income from tips are drastically increasing this year. Mike and I waited tables together in Anna Maria Island back in the 80s and have been buds ever since. Like Finnerty, our staff at the oyster bars are feeling the same thing, as are people all over our region. The most important thing that the new tax plan does is help small businesses stay in businesses, so I can continue employing 333 people, earning livable wages, and supporting our communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Holman. You're recognized.
Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Phil Holman, and I am the President and CEO of Loram Maintenance Away, Inc. Loram is a privately owned company headquartered in Hamel, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis. Loram's mission is to deliver advanced equipment, innovative solutions, and unrivaled customer service in a safe and reliable manner to maintain and improve railway infrastructure. The ability of our railway customers to continue investing in their infrastructure is essential to our future success. A highly efficient and safe railway system is a vital part of our nation's economy, and Loram is proud to play a role in that. Loram employs approximately 1,200 people, primarily working on railway lines across North America. We have manufacturing operations and corporate offices in Minnesota, Illinois, and Texas. With the exception of the Chinese market, all of our products are manufactured in the United States. Although we are relatively small in size, we are unique because there are a limited number of companies around the world who produce specialized railway equipment. Our global competition comes primarily from well-established European companies and state-owned enterprises in China. Our success has always been affected by our ability to compete against organizations who are supported by regulatory regimes or tax systems that favor local industries. In the case of China, we were required to enter a technology transfer agreement and co-produce our equipment in China for that market. The recently enacted tax reforms have somewhat leveled the playing field, and I am confident that we will be able to translate this into growth opportunities for our company, innovations for our customers, and prosperity for our employees. More specifically, as a direct result of tax reform, Loram embarked on a strategy of reinvesting those savings in three key areas. First and foremost, our people. Secondly, our equipment and technology. And lastly, on enhancing our global competitiveness. With regard to our people, Loram increased wages for our field staff by $1 an hour, and we funded a $1,500 bonus to all non-executive employees. Loram is also developing and funding new training programs intended to improve our safety and enhance the technical skills of our employees. With regard to our equipment and technology, LRAM dedicated funding to new capital equipment and will increase spending on research and development focused on new products. With regard to global competitiveness, the tax rate reduction allowed us to adjust our international pricing practices. We are currently competing for several very significant international orders, and if successful, we will increase U.S. production to fulfill those orders. In addition, reducing the U.S. corporate tax rate and eliminating tax incurred when foreign earnings are repatriated will dramatically encourage new U.S. investment. This is not just a benefit for very large multinational corporations. LRAM has Canadian shareholders and a Canadian subsidiary. Prior to tax reform, we were encouraged to optimize our corporate tax structure for the benefit of lower Canadian corporate taxes. As a result of tax reform, our shareholders are now incentivized to reinvest more of those savings back here in the U.S. LRAM derives the lion's share of its businesses from U.S.-based Class I railroads. By their very nature, these customers are almost exclusively invested in the U.S. economy. We believe the tax reform legislation will have a significant positive impact on their business, and we are developing plans to keep pace with that growth. While companies like LRAM will continue to face a host of other challenges, the recently enacted tax reform will be a tremendous help to our business and our employees. I, for one, am excited to see how this historic and fundamental change in our corporate tax structure will impact the U.S. economy and American industry. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Riensmeyer. You may proceed.
Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today. I was a longtime small business owner prior to founding Small Business Majority 12 years ago. For 13 years, I was the founder and CEO of an award-winning interactive communications company, and earlier I was the chief operating officer of a pioneering multimedia business. I founded Small Business Majority to serve as a leading advocate for America's 30 million entrepreneurs. We have a network of 58,000 small businesses across the country with offices, 9 offices here and in 7 states. Despite the undeniable importance of small business to our nation's economy, we are too often left behind during national policy debates and decisions. Our polling finds that 7 in 10 small business owners believe their business is harmed when big corporations use loopholes to avoid taxes, and 85% feel the tax code unfairly benefits large corporations and wealthy Americans. The new tax law has done nothing to address this disparity. Indeed, the new law increases the deficit by $1.5 trillion without giving most entrepreneurs a significant tax break. It adds more complexity and confusion and fails to address loopholes that disadvantage small businesses. First, the real winners of the new tax law are large corporations and wealthy individuals, not the 30 million Main Street small businesses. The law slashes corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%, even though only 5% of small businesses pay corporate taxes. Additionally, the law's treatment of pass-through entities gives the bulk of the benefit to a small sliver of wealthy business owners, not to Main Street. A new report from the Joint Committee on Taxation reveals a whopping 44% of the new pass-through deductions, $17.4 billion, will benefit approximately 200,000 individuals making $1 million or more. In 2024, this will increase to $31.6 billion. According to the JCT report, the majority of the 2018 tax reduction benefit will go to the top 2.3% of pass-through firms, and by 2024, that percentage drops to 1%. By our calculations, a business owner earning $600,000 per year will save 26 times that of an owner with $75,000 in income, despite only earning 8 times more. Most small businesses are indeed very small enterprises that bring in a modest income. According to the Tax Policy Center, less than 2%, 1.7% to be exact, of all pass-through businesses with average profits of nearly $750,000 account for the majority of all pass-through income. These enterprises reaping most of the benefits of the pass-through deductions are most definitely not your typical Main Street small businesses. Moreover, recent polling found a majority of small businesses say they do not plan on hiring new employees or giving raises as a result of the new tax law, and believe that the law favors large corporations over small firms. Second, the tax cuts are structured in a way that is temporary, convoluted, and confusing. Some quotes from our members. Mike Bray, owner of a hobby-based retail store in Maryland. We are all anxious for advice and clarification, having been told too many competing narratives. Annie Wadsworth, second-generation owner of a bagel shop in upstate New York. After doing quite a bit of research regarding the tax law, I'm still confused as to what the changes mean for me and my employees. David Arena, owner of a commercial real estate media business in Philadelphia. They missed an opportunity to simplify taxes for small businesses. I don't actually think this will help us very much when all is said and done. It's not surprising that the National Small Business Association found in a recent survey of its members that a mere 7% say they think filing taxes will become easier under the new law. A third are considering switching from a pass-through entity to a C corporation, and a majority say the temporary nature of the tax cuts is an issue for their business. Third, the new tax law creates an even more unequal playing field for small businesses by allowing a few multinational corporations to funnel their profits to the lowest taxation foreign jurisdictions, a provision small firms are unable to take advantage of. This primarily benefits 30 large corporations, and according to the CBO, corporations will shift $235 billion in profits annually offshore. To make matters worse, this provision sits on top of yet another loophole in the law, allowing large multinational corporations to repatriate their past profits at a deeply discounted rate. And last but not least, the new tax code, with its large gap between top individual rates and top pass-through rates, only encourages wealthy individuals to game the system by simply declaring themselves pass-through business entities. In short, America's hardworking entrepreneurs don't want special treatment. We simply want to compete on a level playing field. We had a once-in-a-generation chance to make our tax code work better for small businesses, and we blew it. Thank you.
Thank you all for your excellent testimony. Now we'll proceed to questions and answer session. I will defer my question to the end of the question period. I now recognize Mr. Roscom, who will begin.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan, and for all the witnesses, thank you for your testimony today. I want to address something that Mr. Doggett mentioned in his opening statement, and that was a criticism of process. And I'll just remind him that the Tax Policy Subcommittee had a hearing on small business, on tax reform, and we were able to incorporate that into the tax reform bill. Now, that said, he's also created a plot trap. And here's the plot trap. Anybody who's benefited from the tax code is easy to dismiss, according to Mr. Doggett, as an exception. Well, what happens if you hear exception after exception after exception after exception after exception? The exception then eats the rule, and it becomes the rule. So we had a hearing last week from people who came to testify, and they said that what they were seeing was an incredible benefit. What you're describing, 4 of you today, are describing very significant benefits. You don't have the wealth. I don't know your backstories. You don't have the wealth of Donald Trump, and that's part of the subtext that Mr. Doggett was arguing, that those are the beneficiaries of this. Certainly that's not Mr. Gray's situation. That's not Mr. Horn's situation, certainly. And yet you're here bearing testimony based on what you've seen. So Mr. Gray from the Show Me State says you're seeing economic optimism. There's also an inherent criticism that we've got to deal with at the front end of this hearing, that stock buybacks are inherently unhealthy for the economy. That's not true. The characterization, the adjective of shareholders that Mr. Doggett used was wealthy shareholders. Well, I'm sure there are some wealthy shareholders, but there are some shareholders who are not wealthy. There are some pension funds that need to grow, and they grow as a result of this. So let's be clear about what we're discussing. Mr. Horn, you said that business confidence is up. Can you just emphasize again to us what the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has meant to you? You gave us some specificity in terms of signage and other things, but what is it that you're seeing, not in surveys, not in polls, not in organizations, not in all of that sort of stuff, but what are you seeing in real life when you're walking around in your shorts and your moccasins in sunny Florida? What are you seeing?
I mean, I do talk to our guests. That's the best part of my job, is I get to interact with my guests. There's a lot of paperwork, but the best part is walking and talking to guests. I'm seeing more of them. I'm seeing them more often. So that tells me that they feel better. They're not staying home. They're not going to Publix and fixing dinner at home. they're going out. They feel comfortable going out. So that tells me if they'll come out, what I used to have a regular that was there every Tuesday, now they're every Tuesday and Thursday, they feel better about it. They're buying things again. You see new cars. You see them making different purchases. We put money into our business. We put money into the LED boards to get people's attention. So we're spending more money, and other people are as well.
And as you spend more money, I mean, just to press the point a little bit, for LED signage, what obviously does that mean for the signage company?
Absolutely. I mean, they're selling more. Obviously, if people are enlarging or remodeling their homes, they're buying appliances from my buddy John Rice. So people are spending money. It just permeates through our community where people are selling their products, they're selling their signs, they're selling appliances. We're selling fish sandwiches.
And Mr. Bach, I'm assuming that the 40 people that you described as the employee owners under an ESOP, a lot of support for ESOPs on this committee, by the way, that's not uber wealth, is it, Mr. Bach? Are those sort of workaday people that are employee owners, and they've been the beneficiaries of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? Is that right?
They have, both in what we're putting into the ESOP as a result of our having cash available, as well as we do pay them well and give them bonuses when we succeed. So as this business is growing, we're seeing more and more opportunities, and our employees are benefiting directly.
You know, just time is evaporating on me, and I think as I was listening to Mr. Ahrensmeyer's testimony, the quotes that he was giving were from people who, it was sort of prospective and confusion, like I'm getting mixed narratives. Yeah, if you're being told that something is bad for you, that's good for you, that's confusing. And I think what we're learning, is this bill perfect? Of course not. Is it good? Yes, it's very good. Mr. Gray, just in closing, what is it that you're seeing from your perspective, from the people that you're interacting around you? Got to turn your mic on.
First thing is I compared the appointments during tax season and the 5 weeks after. In the 5 weeks after, I saw small business coming in almost 2.5 times what they were in a prior year. I see people giving pay raises. I know in my own office, we give raises in December. In the month of April, everybody in the office got an additional pay raise. I have 4 full-time employees. I now have 5. And I'm seeing that throughout. And I'm seeing small business, they're wanting to outsource the technical stuff like that stack right there.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I yield back.
I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Doggett, for any questions that he might have.
Well, thank you very much. I suppose the main difference that Mr. Roscom and I have, since I was at the hearing that he referenced about small business in this subcommittee, is that I believe in having a hearing after we know what's in the bill, and not one that just glorifies small business and its need for relief, that we need to deal with the specifics. And of course, there was no hearing after the bill was finally made public, and no opportunity for small business, or for that matter, anyone else, and certainly no one in the Trump administration with the courage to come and sit where you gentlemen are and answer questions about the difference between the rhetoric and what was actually in the bill. But I want to talk about one issue that there surely can be no dispute about, and that is complexity and added compliance cost. All of us remember the postcard that was out here that was waved around during the markup about how we were going to get great simplicity in the tax code for individuals. So many of them would just be able to fill it out on a postcard. Well, of course, that postcard got lost in the mail for individual tax holders, and the complexity remained. But there is far more complexity for small businesses. And the chart that I put up demonstrates some of the machinations that small businesses have to go through. They certainly won't be able to file on a postcard. There are multiple decisions that have to be made by small businesses. If you're below the income threshold, then you still have to do a couple of calculations, but it's a relatively lesser burden on the taxpayer. If you are above the thresholds that are set out in the Republican bill for many taxpayers, there's a tremendous amount of complexity, some of which might be resolved with guidance, some may not be. This is certainly for small business and for all businesses and individuals a full employment act for CPAs and tax lawyers. From my understanding, the real complexity that is faced by taxpayers does relate to the phase-out ranges that are employed in specified service trades and businesses. These taxpayers are in what I would call pass-through purgatory. They're taxpayers that are employed in a certain field that are disqualified from the deduction if they have incomes above a certain level, but are wholly eligible for the same work if they have incomes below a certain level. Let me, if you just look at the chart and the various decisions that have to be made, you can see the challenges to qualify for this pass-through and the significant amount of resources that will be devoted to accountants to try to accomplish some of this. I think that one of the concepts that was included for individuals was to increase the standard deduction. And that's an argument that has some disadvantages, but it also has some significant advantages. It seems to me, Mr. Ernstmeyer, that if the goal here was to really focus attention on small businesses across America, that it would have been much simpler to just have a small business deduction that would focus on small businesses rather than to shower so many of the benefits on people like the Trump Organization that seemed to be doing fairly well before this tax law was ever enacted. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Congressman. There are many ways to deliver relief to small businesses, but the 76% of small businesses make less than $100,000 in net income. Majority of the average income for self-employed entrepreneurs is about $50,000. So, you know, there's some gentlemen up here who run very successful businesses, and more power to them. But the fact of the matter is, there's 30 million small businesses in this country, and the vast majority are not making that kind of money. So if you want to give them a break, there are ways to do it. We proposed something last year. That's not the only way to do it, but certainly the way to do it is not to have cuts coming from the top so that, you know, the majority of benefits go to 2.3% of pass-through firms.
You could cap in some way the pass-through benefits so that it was focused on doing more for those who are trying to become bigger businesses instead of those at the very top, so that the benefits aren't skewed. That'd be one way, and having a small business standard deduction would be another.
You could just have a cut, say, you know, the first $25,000 worth of income isn't taxed, and then you cap it for businesses making over, say, $200,000. I mean, there's no, you know, there's multiple ways to do it. That's a bottom-up approach. That's where you're going to give direct benefit to most small businesses and not have it coming down from the top.
Those are the kind of concepts that a real genuine hearing looking at this tax law last year might have provided us a better spot for small businesses than, as you said quite correctly, an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we blew. Thank you very much.
Mr. Reichert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arnsmeyer, how many businesses did you say were members of the small business majority?
We have a network of 58,000 businesses.
58,000. Are those businesses also members of the NFIB?
Some of them are. Yes, they are.
I'm confused by your directly 180-degree testimony from the four witnesses prior to your testimony. So you're not hearing any positive stories at all from the 58,000 businesses who are members of the business majority?
For the most part, we're not.
Even though the NFIB has put out statements saying small business optimism is near record highs at levels only last seen in 2004. Small business owners are turning this optimism into increased investments, hiring of employees, and higher wages for their employees. So I just can't believe that some of those 58,000 members of your organizations, being members of the NFIB, are not also part of the positive story that the NFIB is presenting to America as a result of the tax reform bill. So I would like to, I know each of the four witnesses who own businesses here that testified prior to you, Mr. Arnsmeyer, have already described employee benefits in your testimony, but I wonder if we could just go down the line real quick and just list those benefits off as a result of tax reform. What are some of the things that you're seeing for your workers? And I know, Mr. Homan, you even mentioned that you're not giving raises or bonuses to the executive positions in your company, but to those people who are doing the everyday work. So, Mr. Homan, just list off quickly some of the benefits that you're seeing for your employees.
Yes, that's correct, Congressman. Roughly half of our employees are field laborers, so they operate and maintain heavy equipment. They generally work 6 weeks on the road, living in hotels. They're kind of basically salt of the earth kind of folks who are out there. If you drive by people doing road construction all day, ours would be the same type of folks out there doing.
Are they getting raises?
And every one of those folks got a $1,500 bonus, and every one of those folks got a $1 an hour raise that went all through the whole organization.
What does that do for your productivity, the employees' productivity in your company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's really about employee morale, and it's about how they feel, about where they work, and about their place. And I can't tell you how many emails I got or how many handshakes I got in the hallway, sort of thanking me, you know, for doing that. I basically said, well, you know, don't thank me.
Stick with me, right?
Go thank your local congressman.
Yeah. Well, your employees, too, are probably more than likely to stay with your company since they're receiving bonuses and wages.
We would hope that.
Yeah. Mr. Horn.
Yes, Congressman. We invest back into our plant, into our restaurants. We want our staff to be, I mean, all of our staff are 50% are tipped employees. So the main part of their income is from the guest.
More customers?
More customers, more sales, more tips. It's very simple in the restaurant business. So we want to make sure that the plant, the restaurant, the atmosphere is conducive to people coming in more often.
Happier employees, happier customers.
Absolutely.
Happier
We have a
customers,
tremendous,
more customers.
Correct. Our retention is phenomenal. We take care of our customers, we take care of our guests, and we take care of our staff, so they will take care of the guests.
And as was pointed out by Mr. Roscom, that's a spinoff to other businesses too, the signage company that you mentioned in your testimony.
The carpet company, the roofer.
Carpet companies, it's right? Mr.
Absolutely.
Bach.
We look at something similar, although we're putting money back into the company, and I mentioned the $5 million that we're making in investment. There is a direct correlation to employee satisfaction to customer satisfaction. If we have more customers, it means that they're performing better. It means that we'll pay them more. It is a function of their retirement. As to what we pay them, there's a percentage then that's applied that allows us to put it into the retirement, which, by the way, somebody my age, that makes great sense. But we also pay them in cash. Everybody got raises, and everybody got that $1,500 bonus in December.
And the other great thing is that you're creating more jobs for more people to have that same opportunity.
We are.
I yield back. My time is out. I'm sorry, Mr. Gray.
Ms. Sanchez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I agree with Mr. Doggett that we should have had legislative hearings about how the actual tax text would impact important constituencies like small businesses, but here we are doing a little Monday morning quarterbacking instead. The obvious question that I hear from my constituents about the new tax law is, Congresswoman, exactly how is this going to affect me? And unfortunately, all too often, my answer to most is that they won't be seeing that much of a benefit. This is more acute for small businesses across my district because some minor temporary gains for the people I represent pale in comparison to the outrageous giveaways to extremely wealthy individuals and corporations. One of the best parts of my job is when I'm back in my district and I go on these small business walks, because through those walks, not only do I find the greatest local restaurants and shops, but I get to have honest dialogue and conversations about what specific obstacles small businesses face. And one theme that emerges over and over again through these business walks is this feeling like small businesses are being left out, feeling like the system is leaving them behind. Small businesses in my district are not asking for a handout, they're asking for something very simple, a little bit of fairness. Unfortunately, the bulk of what passed in H.R. 1 is in direct contrast to that goal. It didn't meaningfully bring small business owners back into the fold. Instead, it was a massive tax break for uber wealthy corporations, and to add insult to injury, it's balanced on the back of the true small businesses that are in my district. If there is one group that deserves a fairer tax rate, it's those small businesses and not huge multinational corporations that are finally bringing home money that they've been stashing offshore. And it certainly shouldn't have, the bulk of the benefits certainly shouldn't have gone to hedge fund partners so that they can finance yet another yacht. Squeezing the people in the middle, hard-working people and small business owners, has a long-standing impact throughout the community. I wanted a tax reform that would relieve pressure and let businesses buy that new machine, hire that next worker, or even put a little away for their own retirement. Now, honestly, my biggest concern right now is what will the Republicans do? Now that some of them have suddenly woken up to realize that the tax bill that they voted for will add trillions of dollars to the deficit. How are we going to pay this $2.3 trillion tax bill price tag? I'm worried that it's going to come out of the retirement savings of hardworking Americans, and that's the last thing that middle-class families and small businesses need when they are trying to do right by their workers and just get ahead. Republicans often focus on the competitiveness of our companies, and while I don't disagree that that should be a priority, equally as important should be the competitiveness of our communities, the success of small businesses and working families, the ability to successfully operate a local business, afford quality childcare, and drive on safe roads. That should be a focus as well. The new tax law was sold as this silver bullet for increased economic growth that would result in an explosion of good-paying jobs, but in reality, the law provided modest temporary benefits for working people and local businesses, but didn't accomplish the meaningful reform that we had a chance to do. I want to begin my question with Mr. Arsenmeyer. I must say that your written testimony was spot on with what I've been hearing back home. And I know you discussed it a bit already, but with the little time that I have left, I'd like you to expand a bit on your second and third points. To me, these are really interrelated. The new tax law provisions are so convoluted that most small business owners will have to spend large sums of money to stay on the right side of the law, while sophisticated, wealthy taxpayers will be able to continue to game the system. What are you hearing from your members about how this is beginning to play out?
Well, Congresswoman, as I mentioned in my testimony, we're hearing that there's tremendous confusion. I should point out there have been surveys done by groups across the political spectrum, from the NFIB, the NSBA, and Businesses for Responsible Tax Reform. All of them find there's tremendous confusion out there. So this is not a partisan response to this issue. And you can see the chart that the ranking member put up there. This bill certainly did not do anything to improve on the tax law's confusion.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a report and statement from Professor Carolyn Bruckner of the Kogut School of Business at the American University. It details the unique needs of women business owners and how this tax bill did not take into account any of their special and unique needs when we were formulating this bill, nor when it was passed without hearings on the merits.
We'll add it. Mr. Renacci, you recognize.
May I submit that, please? I'm asking
Yes.
unanimous consent.
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Renacci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee for holding this hearing today. As a businessman and a certified public accountant for 30 years, I understand the needs of small business. It's a story I lived, and I will continue to advocate for policies that will help small business owners achieve the American dream. You know, over the last 6 months in Ohio, I must be living in a bubble because I've heard countless stories about the benefits of tax reform that have been passed along to consumers, employees, and job seekers. At last week's hearing, I tried to read off a list of companies exemplifying the benefits of tax reform. It was so long, I ran out of time and couldn't get through everyone. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is working for small business owners. I see it. I'm a CPA. It's not as difficult as some want to say it is. But Mr. Arensmeyer, before I ask you, you quoted JCT as saying that 44% of the 199A deduction goes to millionaires. If we don't know how much tax they paid before tax reform, then it's impossible, it isn't possible to evaluate whether this is disproportionate tax relief or whether it's commensurate with the taxes they pay. So let's look at the actual data from JCT to answer that question. As it actually turns out, the tax relief matches the share of the taxes that they pay. According to JCT, the 199A deduction will reduce income taxes paid by 38% for businesses earning under $75,000. In contrast, the 199A deduction will reduce income taxes paid by just under 8% for businesses earning more than $1 million. I really appreciate, Mr. Bach, you traveling here and talking about your company. Philpot is employee-owned. The $1,500 bonus is paid to all its employees, yourself excluded. The new job creation in combination with the repatriation of jobs from China, the positive supply chain implications, the sense of business optimism, and the capital expenditure implications. I know that as I travel the state of Ohio, I keep hearing positive things. According to the National Federation of Independent Business Owners, the number of small business owners that believe now is a good time to expand is at an all-time high. Is your experience in the small business community, is it optimism like now in comparison to prior years? Is there much optimism?
Tremendous optimism, and you said you read a list of successful companies. I hope you got to the P's, so you mentioned Philpot, because we're one of them. We deal on the supply side with very small companies. They express optimism. Our customers are really along the supply chain. We may hit it 5 times before, in the case of a durable goods sale, we end up selling to 5 different layers of the supply chain, all of which we have communication with, and all of which are highly positive and have great expectations for what the future is going to bring.
How do you see your company's capital investment changing due to tax reform, both now and looking ahead?
Well, we just invested $5 million. It had been probably 20 years combined. We hadn't invested that much because things were going the other way. The company moved to China with manufacturing in 1990. This $5 million is only the beginning. We have put brand new molding equipment in. Our employees walk out of the facility looking almost like I do now. They don't look like they came out of a coal mine. We have great jobs, great people, and we look forward to a great future.
Thank you. Other than Mr. Arnsmeyer, who said there's negative effects, Mr. Gray, Mr. Horn, Mr. Homan, do you see any negative effects from tax reform? Yes or no?
No.
Absolutely none.
No, other than, I wouldn't necessarily disagree about some complexity. I started my career as a CPA, and I'm today happy to call myself a recovering CPA because I think there are opportunities in the future to clarify in some of your future technical corrections. But in terms of the spirit of the law and the effect it's having on small businesses, I don't think there's anything I would change.
Well, look, we don't want to put CPAs out of a job either. Those are actual jobs, too. So I appreciate that. Again, I want to thank the chairman for allowing me to participate in this hearing, as well as the colleagues for their continued work on this important issue, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. And I just want to point out that there's been a couple of folks that said that, 4 of you think one way and only 1 thinks the other. Please know that the Republicans picked the witnesses. And if it were the other way around, I'm sure we could find 4 who agreed with us and 1 who agreed with you. But thank you all for being here, and your stories were certainly impressive. Mr. Arnsmeyer, you spoke a lot in your testimony, written testimony, talked about the complexity of the pass-through deduction. And I've heard from a lot of folks in my district, small business owners, that say the same thing. And there's one in particular that I thought was interesting. I want to quote one passage from it. And it's from an organization that represents a lot of small businesses. And like you, Mr. Gray, I'm a farmer also. And in my district, it's made up of a lot of farmers, a lot of ranchers. I represent California's wine district. And small businesses, small wineries, oftentimes join together in order to do better business, as you can imagine. And one way they do that is to pool their resources or use a third-party storage facility before the wine is sent out. And The passage from this letter is prior to the passage of Public Law 1597, the Republican tax bill, we were able to process excise tax payments for clients by claiming the small producer's tax credit on their behalf. This simplified tax reporting for members and ensured timely tax payments for the TTB. This process has been completely disrupted by this new legislation. And I had, for instance, just the other day, I had a small vintner in my district said that since the Republican tax bill was passed, I'm paying $10,000 a month more because of this provision. And I want to ask unanimous consent to have this letter from the Sonoma County Vintners Co-op read into the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I think that's illustrative of what a number of folks on our side have talked about, and that is doing a major tax bill, the most significant tax change in over 30 years, without a single hearing, without hearing from a single witness. None of the four of you would do business that way. It's absolutely unacceptable, and all it's done is cause problem after problem, similar to the one from the Sonoma County Vintners Association. And what was supposed to be an expansion of the small producer credit for wine producers became one complicated mess. So now wineries have to dedicate compliance staff just to deal with the new complexity that this quote-unquote tax simplification bill has brought about. Mr. Ansmeyer, you say in your testimony that the National Small Business Association found that a mere 7% of its members say they think filing taxes will become easier under the new tax law. Can you explain how this complexity makes it harder for small businesses to focus on business rather than on working through complicated taxes?
Yes, Congressman. The tax law is complicated as it is, and as I think we've heard, it was sold as a simplification measure. It's definitely not that. I mean, we're hearing nothing but confusion out there, and obviously it goes without saying that the time that's spent dealing with paperwork and tax matters is time away from actually running the business and courting customers and focusing on the product, et cetera. So that has not been something that has been fixed at all. I did want to add one other thing. I mean, we've heard a lot about the success of businesses now. There's no question the economy is better. Now, it's much better for those at the top than at the bottom, but it is kind of better all around, and clearly we're hearing more small business confidence. It's not because of the tax law. It's because of a growing economy over the last 8 years pulling out of the Great Recession. So I just wanted to make that point.
And also, do you have any of your small business owners telling you that they expect to file their taxes on a postcard?
That was generally what was talked about, and
it talks about from that side of this dais, but it's not a reality.
No, it's not a reality.
And I also want to just point out two other things. One of the witnesses, Mr. Gray, I believe it was you, talked about health care. This tax bill took health care away from 13 million people. And the CBO said that everybody else is going to see a 10% increase in their premium because of this tax bill, not because of something else. And then lastly, I just want to point out that $2.3 trillion was added to our debt because of this tax bill. And I don't know where you grew up farming, but where I grew up farming, that's not a good thing. I yield back, balance my time.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clearly by listening to the conversations on here, it's like we're from two different planets and we're looking at legislation two different ways. I do want to ask some questions to Mr. Gray. In your statement, you were talking about the majority of Missourians and the people in our area will benefit greatly under the 20% deduction on the pass-throughs. And I wanted to look at some IRS data because we've heard numbers from all different witnesses of like, it's so complicated, it's only helping the wealthy. Let me read this IRS data, and I want to see if you would agree with common sense Missouri logic that that's probably accurate in our state. But it says, according to IRS data, 86% of married taxpayers are below the $315,000 income threshold in the new pass-through provision, and so would get the 20% deduction without any limitation, making it very simple. Is that what you see in Missouri?
Yes, that's part of my testimony was.
It was. And so the IRS is saying, you're right, Mr. Gray. So I'm glad we're having some truth spoken about it being simple for at least 86% of joint taxpayers and pass-throughs?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the communication and definitions. So I see this exhibit here. I actually have one that I teach, and it's about half the size. But when I talk about the 86%, what I look at, it's as simple as, let's say that I'm married and I'm a lazy husband. What happens is my spouse is making $100,000 a year on a Schedule C. It's the only thing on the return. We're going to do a tax return in about 30 seconds. What's going to happen is, if we look at the bottom of the return, my adjusted gross income is $100,000. Standard deduction went to 24.
So how many people do you think doubling the standard deduction affected in Missouri?
A large part. We're going to have several people not itemizing anymore.
So that'll be very simple to file your taxes, correct?
Right. And this QBI deduction, if I'm below the threshold, making $100,000, subtract off the 24, QBI says I get either 20% of $100,000 or 20% of my taxable income. Well, 20% of $76,000, that's 100 minus 24, is $15,200. If my wife gets me off the couch and I go to work for a W-2 for a new job, then I make together jointly $124,000. My itemized deduction is $24,000. So what happens is my taxable income is $100,000, my QBI is $100,000. Guess what? I get my 20%. We've just now done a return. Free file tax returns should be able to do a calculation like that. That's 86% of the people that's small business.
It sounds pretty simple. What about, there was a provision in the tax code that we added that would allow cash accounting for businesses under 25 million to try to help make it easier. Do you think that that would make it easier?
Yes, you did that in several areas. It went from 10 million to 25 million, and that's like any system. As we go on, it's a way of maybe indexing and doing a tax return simpler.
So simplifying the code with that provision, thank you, Mr. Gray. It was stated earlier that there's roughly 30 million small businesses in the United States. And if 86%, according to IRS data, is benefiting from the no restrictions, easy 20% deduction on their taxes, tax cut, that's 25,800,000 small businesses. That's pretty substantial. That's not 7%. That is 86% of 30 million. I also think that it's important to listen to some of these numbers. When you're listening to this is from the Joint Committee on Taxation. 77% of all the tax relief derived from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act goes solely to families and small businesses. 77% from the Joint Committee on Tax. That's a nonpartisan group. Just because you did not like the Tax Cut and Jobs Act and you wanted it to not pass doesn't mean it's not benefiting your constituents and benefiting the majority of Americans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Delbenny. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for being with us this morning. First, I'd like to share a story we heard from Rashonda Young. She's the owner of Popcorn Heaven, which is a successful gourmet popcorn franchise with 5 locations, soon to be 6. Rashonda said, and I quote, "The Republican tax law is not what my business needs to create jobs and grow. I've talked with my accountant, and the nominal tax cut I might receive won't cause me to grow my business or hire more employees. In fact, this tax law makes me worried more than anything. I'm worried about my employees and customers' access to quality, affordable health care. In order to pay for the tax cuts to wealthy corporations, Republicans are sabotaging the ACA by repealing the individual mandate. Coupled with other efforts by the Trump administration, including the expansion of short-term and junk health plans, premiums are increasing by double-digit numbers, while the quality of coverage is decreasing," end quote. Rashonda told us that before Popcorn Heaven, she was running her dad's small business. She said, quote, "We had been searching for insurance for years, and pre-existing conditions were the biggest stumbling block. The failed system that was in place before the ACA made it unaffordable for us to provide health insurance for our employees. The policies we were shown also denied health benefits for several of our employees due to pre-existing medical conditions," end quote. Rashonda saw firsthand the impact that a broken healthcare system had on her employees. But she said, quote, "After passage of the ACA, we were able to put a plan in place for our employees that did not exclude their pre-existing conditions. When I opened Popcorn Heaven in 2014, I was grateful to have an affordable health insurance option for my employees. To go back to where we started from doesn't make any sense. Our members of Congress need to start making some smart decisions, and undermining access to life-saving health care to give trillions of dollars in tax cuts to their wealthy donors is not one. It's putting us into a tailspin," end quote. So, Mr. Ahrensmeyer, the Republican tax bill, as you know, repealed the individual mandate. So how will this impact current small business owners like Rashonda, or those who are considering starting a small business?
Well, Congresswoman, you're absolutely right. It repealed the individual mandate. The percentage of first of all, everyone forgets, we're talking about this, everyone thinks it was great before the passage of the ACA, but actually if you start looking at what's happened with the Affordable Care Act since its passage, the tremendous benefits to small business. 31% of small business employees were without coverage prior to the ACA. That number has dropped to 19%. That's 4 million additional small business employees covered. The percentages are almost identical among self-employed entrepreneurs. In addition, when it comes to costs, the only comparison we can do is in the small group market because the individual market was so different. The costs were increasing 10.4% average annually before the ACA. It's been 5.2% in the small group market since then. So we've seen tremendous benefits to getting a lot more independent entrepreneurs, small business owners, and small business employees covered. And the problem is the individual mandate is a significant part of that. And this law did remove that, and now the problem is, there's a risk of not having healthy younger people in the system, and there's going to be pressure on rates going up, not because of the Affordable Care Act, but because of the removal of a key provision.
Mm-hmm. And are you hearing that from a lot of your members?
Yes, in fact, healthcare ranks much higher than taxes on all the surveys we do in terms of importance to small business.
So will the Republican tax law incentivize growth and hiring, or will it give small business owners anxiety about whether they can afford to grow and still provide competitive wages and benefits, like health care? And if they can't do that, will that hold them back from creating new jobs and expanding their businesses?
Well, there's no question that the law only benefits, as I've said in my testimony, the primary benefits are to much bigger pass-through entities and large corporations. So we're not seeing, it's a combination of the anxiety you talk about, but also the fact that the real benefits are fairly small. There are definitely benefits to some small businesses, and there's definitely businesses to larger pass-through entities and other larger corporations, that, as you've heard here. But the combination of the anxiety and the combination of the fact that if you're going to pass a 1.5 trillion or 2.3 trillion, as I've heard here, hit to the deficit, you want to have those benefits more evenly spread and particularly benefiting small businesses. So we're not hearing that the tax law is creating any great interest in hiring or providing an investment to the vast majority of the 30 million small businesses out there.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Rice, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The views and the opinions on the effect of the Tax Act are certainly startlingly divergent, where Mrs. Pelosi, for example, called it Armageddon, has promised that if the Democrats retake the House, that they will do away with the tax bill. But then you look at the actual numbers where unemployment rates are at 20-year lows, all-time lows for African-American unemployment. Business confidence is at decade highs. GDP growth is at over 3% at levels that were never achieved during the entire Obama administration. I just wonder what planet we're on here when we can't see how positive that this bill has been for the economy. Mr. Gray, you have a CPA practice, correct?
Yes.
How many clients do you have?
Well, that's according, it's like any stat. Are you talking about annual clients?
Just roughly how many clients do you serve? You
Around 1,000.
1,000 clients. Have you done any projections for those clients? Because, you know, the tax bill, they haven't paid taxes under the new bill yet. That'll be for next April. Have you done projections for them, any of your clients, to determine what the effect of the new tax bill will have on them?
What we tried to do this tax season, anytime we had a small business client coming in, when they set up the interview, we looked at the features of the new law, and what we tried to do is go over what items would impact their return for the coming year. There's not enough time to do plannings at that point in time, so what we would do if they wanted to move forward is that we would set up a planning session. So over the last few weeks, I've done several planners almost daily, and what's
your conclusion? Are their tax rates, are their tax bills going to go up or down?
Their tax bills are actually going to go down.
Would you characterize it as minimal or substantial reduction in their taxes?
Well, I think that if you're looking at a percentage, it's sizable to them because 20% is 20%. When somebody says, I only have to pay taxes on 80% of what I make, that makes a difference to them. So if I have somebody that
makes a big difference to a small business, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Mr. Gray, I would let you go on, but I just don't have enough time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Bach, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you said you made rubber components and you had offshored to China and you reshored. I'm sure you reshored before the tax bill, so that really wasn't a factor, correct?
Well, it was to the extent that as we were putting our plan together, we knew it was going to take, there was risk there. And by discussing with some of your peers what was going on, specifically Mr. Renacci.
So you were kind of counting on getting the tax bill done when you reshored?
It was part of it.
All right. So both before and after reshoring, you compete with other folks, right? I think you said that you compete with folks from Europe and other places?
Yeah, primarily the big competition, though, is out of Asia.
Okay. And so did you find that our tax code with a 35% bracket puts you at a disadvantage to companies offshore?
Definitely.
And so this tax code has made you more competitive in the world, right?
That's correct.
Which allows you more sales and more employees and so forth.
Yes.
Mr. Homan, you said you compete primarily with people who make specialty railroad products in Europe. Mm-hmm. Those folks have significantly lower income tax rates than we do here, correct?
That's correct.
Did you find that paying a 35% corporate income tax here puts you at a disadvantage to those who are paying, say, a 20% corporate income tax in Europe?
It's a significant disadvantage when it comes to pricing our products on a global basis and competing in areas of the globe where neither one of us are domiciled. Obviously, that would give them a 15% advantage right off of the giddy-up before we get started, so yes.
So have you found your competitiveness has improved as a result of this tax bill?
Yeah, Congressman, unique to our industry, our sales cycle is years in the making. It takes us over a year to produce some of the equipment we do, so we are just at the beginning of starting to compete on a global basis under the new laws as they're written today. So I do expect, as I've stated in my testimony, that this will make us more competitive and lead to future growth. I can't say as I've seen it today just because of the nature of our particular industry.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, may I submit for the record, Ms. Delbenny had an article from the Main Street Alliance without objection. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would also like to join in both thanking our panelists and congratulating them. It does seem that for 4 of you, you've done extraordinarily well, and we're happy for you. I don't know anybody in fact, whenever they get a tax cut or mentions the fact that there's a tax cut that's ever been unhappy with that. It's just that our colleagues keep on saying to us they can't understand why we're perplexed on this side. I guess they couldn't understand why Lee Zeldin, a Republican from New York, said, on balance, this bill remains a geographic redistribution of wealth, taking extra money from a place like New York, say Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, California, and to pay for deeper tax cuts elsewhere. This bill chooses winners and losers in a way that could and should have been avoided. That's been our contention from the outset. We want to see tax cuts for small businesses. We just think that the way that we've gone about it, you know, having a hearing after the bill has been enacted and hearing its impact doesn't make an awful lot of sense to us, because we feel that we could have very easily rectified a number of the problems that the coming revolution is going to be caused in the blue states that are being double taxed to pay for some of these tax cuts that you gentlemen rightfully and have acknowledged are doing well by. We would like to see all 50 states flourish in this way and with a tax system that's fair to everyone. And I don't think there's any of you on the panel that would disagree with that. But that's not the way that this proposal came down. And listen, that's politics, and sometimes it happens that way. Started with a bat tax, that wasn't acceptable or agreeable, that was pulled off the table. Everybody went to the back room, not even members on this committee were in that back room, where ultimately the tax decisions on what we're dealing with were decided. And then it came here to the committee and was rammed through. Now we're dealing with the consequences. These consequences aren't Democrat or Republican. Mr. Zeldin is a Republican. Mr. King is a Republican. It depends geographically where you are and whether or not, for example, you utilize SALT deductions, how you're impacted in your given state. And that is a travesty, because what happens is people are saying, again, there's a lack of confidence in the government that would have one segment of the society pay for another's tax relief. And with all of that, still most of the benefits going to the top 1%, with the hope that somehow it will trickle down. And Mr. Arnsmeyer, I know that the National Small Business Association stated its priorities were that we should have a tax reform that provided simplification, parity between small and large businesses, permanency and predictability, and addressing the deficit. In your estimation, did this tax bill do that?
No, it did not, Congressman.
Now, it may have done it for some of you, but do you believe, Mr. Gray, that across the board that that's what this tax bill achieved?
It's kind of a leading question because you referred to SALT, which is the itemized deductions.
Well, yeah, it is leading because that's what the bill did.
Correct, but one of the backstops to that that's always been there, I mentioned in my testimony, is AMT. So the people in my area that have high income and the SALT is high, we do have a few people in our area that make above the threshold, et cetera, but they get hit by AMT tax. Now, I know this chamber was not responsible for that.
But
that's still there.
I hear it. Mr. Bach? Does it meet the 4 tests?
As far as I'm concerned, and I choose not to be confused by this, we pay state tax in Ohio. The analysis that my tax planner, as well as the people with our company, it's a benefit to us.
Mr. Horn?
I'm not an accountant. I know how to serve.
I understand.
But I do hire an accountant, and that's where I got the information about the 20% deduction. He called me. Pardon?
Yep. And you're from Florida?
Florida, yes, sir. So there's no state sales
tax. Mr. Holman?
Or
income tax, excuse me.
Yes, I'm from Minnesota. We're not particularly known as a low-tax state. But you know, to my knowledge, the laws that are passed apply equally to all corporations, no matter where they domicile. As far as the effect from the personal tax side, which is what you're talking about, I guess I would defer to
I
others.
thank you for the leniency of allowing them to answer the questions. Thank you all. Thank the witnesses.
Thank you. Mrs. Nome, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague was just complaining about how damaging this bill and policy is when the aggregate tax cut in Connecticut, his home state, in 2019 will be $4.5 billion. In my home state of South Dakota, it's going to be $1 billion. So he is receiving 4 times the benefit that my state
will the gentlelady
is.
yield?
I will not yield.
I didn't think so.
But I will clarify that we are a low-tax state in South Dakota. We don't have a lot of people there. But everywhere I travel in the state, people are telling me stories about the benefit of tax reform. I'm a lifelong farmer and rancher. I started and ran a hunting lodge for many years. We have an insurance agency. I managed my mother's restaurant for many years. It doesn't matter, very hard business, Mr. Horn. One of my least favorites, but it was a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun too. But listen, I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today and telling your stories, both in your written testimony and what you shared with us, conveying why this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was so important for you and your employees. And as you've heard so far, our friends on the other side of the aisle are working hard to develop a false narrative on tax reform, a narrative that seems more focused on President Trump rather than on the policies that were in the bill. And I have to say it's extremely difficult for our Democrat friends to keep up this charade, even faced with example after example of success that has resulted because of this policy. I'm extremely pleased that we have actual small businesses here, and I'm happy that their testimony reflects the fact that this bill is working. So, Mr. Gray, you said the tax law shows that America is investing in small business and that the economic attitude is positive. Mr. Bach, you said the tax law is creating growth drivers for your business. And Mr. Homan, you said the tax law allowed your business to embark on a strategy of reinvesting your savings. And finally, Mr. Horn, your words were some of the most critical. You said the tax law helps small businesses stay in business. And South Dakota is home to over 80,000 small businesses across the state. Those are the kind of stories that I hear when I crisscross the state. And I spoke to a number of folks in the agriculture industry in South Dakota who wanted to be with us here today, but it's planting time, and they're all out in the field and have to get seed in the ground. But it's not just agriculture that is benefiting from this tax bill. I hear stories from Aladdin Industry in Elk Point, which provided bonuses of up to $1,000 per employee. They're spending between $1 and $2 million on new equipment, and Ryder, located in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Rapid City, gave tax reform bonuses to their employees. But like I said in our hearing last week, anecdotal stories are nothing unless they're backed up with data. So I know Mr. Reichert asked Mr. Ernstmeyer about whether some of his member companies are also members of NFIB, and apparently a few of them are. And these companies are undoubtedly aware that some new data was just released from NFIB, and I think that that as a group that truly represents small businesses across the country. I want to highlight the results of a survey that NFIB just released a couple weeks ago. 76% of small business owners believe the current business climate is heading in the right direction. 87% of small business owners think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will have a positive impact on the economy. 75% of small business owners think the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will have a positive impact on their businesses. 51% expect that they'll pay less in federal income taxes next year. 47% of small business owners who expect to pay fewer taxes next year plan to use the savings to reinvest in their business. Many plan to invest in their employees through higher compensation. And Mr. Chairman, this is exactly why the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is so important. It helps our small businesses stay in business. It puts us on the road to growth and reinvestment in our people and in our small businesses. And that's what I hear overwhelmingly across my state of South Dakota, and that's why it's so vital that we keep it up and not entertain false narratives like we've heard from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle today at this hearing. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to travel here and share your stories. It's incredibly important. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schweikert. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm elated to be on this particular subcommittee. It's nice to know, though, this subcommittee has the same sort of theater that all the others do, and math is still secondary, but hey, we'll do our best here. And if that was sarcastic, that's what I was going for. So I actually, part of what I'm after here is, okay, we'll have the theater on the tax reform because, you know, the ideology had turned out to be partisan. But for small business, you're key to our society's employment base. There's other factors out there other than just the taxes you pay. It's access to capital, access to labor, access to be able to get a permit to build the new restaurant, those things. I am curious because, you know, I've been bathing in the data of what we're seeing in the employment markets, and you would think there'd be this sense of joy from all of us that we're seeing a lot of our brothers and sisters who just came through a pretty rough decade, are long-term unemployed, a lot of our disaffected populations are moving into the labor market. That's wonderful. But if you're hiring, it also means your hiring has probably gotten much tougher. Can you walk me through what are the headwinds, the three of you in the middle who actually employ people in ongoing concerns? What are your headwinds? Is it access to capital? Is it labor? Is it barriers to entry, permitting? Mr. Horn, Mr. Bach, I mean, what do we need to do as policymakers if many of us believe good things are happening in our society? What policy sets do we need to be pursuing to keep it going?
I think a lot of ours is labor. I mean, 333 employees for 4 restaurants, that's a lot of people. I mean, that's our biggest concentration is the labor. So to provide the workforce to make sure that it's easy to hire, that it's easy to explain to them what benefits we have and everything that we offer to them is the easiest thing. We're looking for a trained workforce. We work with advisory boards for the local trade schools to help in the culinary programs. Okay. Funding to the culinary programs and all the trade schools is important. Not everybody's going to college. We need workforce.
Ms. Bach.
Ours is definitely labor. There are many challenges, but right now we will train the people. We'll bring them up to speed, show them how to do what we do.
Could you give me more definition on that? Because a couple of weeks ago, we actually had an amazing experience where we had a gentleman who was hired out of prison and given the training, and the electrical contractor so needed labor, they were willing to take a chance on populations that in a previous year would have been abandoned. What are you doing?
We've gone so far as to talk to the common police judge and to say that we have places to go when people, rather than community service. It is just very, very difficult to find people that will want to work in a factory, albeit one that's not a sweatshop and we pay well. They're just not available.
Thank you for doing that. That's actually, Mr. Holman?
Like most businesses, our single greatest expense is on our employees and on our labor. I would echo the comments that were previously stated about perhaps more emphasis on technical and trade schools. Those are the type of folks that we would have really good paying jobs for if they were interested in joining us. I don't see an access to capital as an impediment to our growth. There's plenty of free flow of capital in the markets. But access to labor is probably my number one concern today relative to things that would be affecting my growth. I have open positions today that I can't fill. So,
someone that's been a journeyman, someone that's been with you for several years. What salary range, what hourly range will they?
I would have 20-year-old kids with high school degrees who would have some form of mechanical aptitude, making $80,000 a year. It would be not uncommon.
Okay. Look, and I know it's only a snapshot, and I know we're only, 170 days since the tax reform became law. And dear Lord, I hope the snapshot from GDP now, the Atlanta Fed, is real, because whether you be on the right or the left, if we actually could have a couple quarters of 4% GDP, it will help us with a lot of our societal difficulties We have massive unfunded liabilities in particularly Medicare. And it's not about the tax reform, it's about demographics. But somehow theater outweighs math around here, and that breaks my heart. But maybe we're starting to head the right direction. And with that, yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses also for being here today and taking the time to testify. One thing I want to correct is something that Mr. Ahrensmeyer had mentioned earlier about the international provisions. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the international reforms in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will actually reduce profit shifting by over $700 billion through 2028. And in the Joint Committee on Tax, the macroeconomic analysis specifically credits our international tax changes that we have made with increasing foreign direct investment here in the United States. And I don't think from the perspective of we've seen all these benefits in the first 170 some days, as my colleague had mentioned, it's only been 4.5 months, we got all these encouraging results. But the international provisions in particular are where we will see long-lasting reinvestment decisions by companies to actually return to the United States, which is actually a good thing that we're having happening. I certainly have the anecdotes in Minnesota. I have dozens of companies, and Mr. Holman, you're here today to kind of share your perspective. I talk to small business folks, medium companies, and large companies actually in Minnesota that are directly impacted by the new tax law in a positive manner, and and you get the larger economic indicators, right? We study this in the Joint Economic Committee and our committee here. Unemployment's down, jobless claims, at a 50-year low, optimism high, wages up, investment in employees and operations, capital equipment is up, and we've talked about that, and we've heard different perspectives from you and from members of the committee over the last couple of weeks in particular. Let me just ask you this, Mr. Holman, because you mentioned in your testimony you've been reinvesting the savings from tax reform into your company, into your employees. You got capital equipment, you got research and development. It's going to result in future growth, and you've outlined that in particular as you save points from 35% down to 21%. Can you also, as you just scratch the surface of this, but can you explain a little bit deeper maybe how those types of business investments are actually going to lead to stronger growth, and in turn, what does stronger growth mean in terms of actual future job creation?
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, I mean, like any investor, if you're all investing your own money, you're going to invest it looking for a return. So what our investors would look for is an after-tax rate of return. So that means investments in our business that may have been marginal in the past, may have been sort of on the fence where we're not quite sure if that's going to pay off or not. When we look at it under the lens of the new tax law, the after-tax rate of return would increase by a fair amount, and so investments that were now marginal can become reality. So when we make those investments, typically in capital equipment or adding to our fleet, we employ lots of folks for the fabrications and the assemblies and the pieces and parts. So any piece of equipment that we would build would resonate throughout our supply community of hundreds of companies that we buy from in our supply chain. So whether they're investing in our own fleet because of the 100% deductibility of capital equipment, which has made a significant impact, or whether it's equipment that we build for foreign export, it has the same effect on our entire supply chain and on the entire community that we procure from. So I guess it's exponential in terms of the benefit to us. It ripples throughout our entire supply.
So it's exponential. I mean, it sounds like it's sort of like rocket fuel in some ways. So your customers are doing well, your supply chain gets stronger, and employs more people from the small business perspective. In terms of, I think of a lot of your suppliers, I would imagine. But you also mentioned in your testimony you're currently competing for several significant international orders. Mm-hmm. What's sort of the timing do you expect on those types of international orders that are coming out? It's only going to get better and stronger, I would assume. But is that near term or long term?
Yeah, these are parts of the world that are sort of less developed. So currently, Ministry of Rail in India, for an example, has building new dedicated freight lines. They're obviously got billions of people in congested infrastructure, and so little companies like us in Hamel, Minnesota, are partaking in that in various parts of the world. So those sort of government-type contracts take months, if not years, to run to fruition. But the timing of this is great because we are in the bidding stage of those particular contracts. So we would work for mining companies around the world who own railroads. We work for state-owned enterprises or national rail systems around the world. And our technology is unique in that way. So it is hugely beneficial for us to be able to build American and export that equipment if we can be more competitive on the global stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You go back.
Mr. Doggett, you recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for the way you have conducted this morning's hearing, and thanks, agree or disagree, to each of our witnesses. I would ask unanimous consent to place the following news reports in the record. From Forbes, Tax Geek Tuesday, making sense of the new 20% qualified business income deduction. From Reuters, U.S. Republican tax laws pass-through deduction open to gaming. From Bloomberg, no one sure who qualifies for this $415 billion U.S. tax deduction. From Forbes again, the Republican tax plan's break for small business yields huge benefits for big business. From Business Insider, a new report shows that one of the biggest breaks in Trump's tax law will go to the richest Americans. From Vox, Trump said this tax break was for small businesses. It's giving $17 billion to millionaires this year. Another one, rich Americans have found yet another tax loophole. And from Bloomberg, here's the Trump tax loophole your accountant can blow wide open. I would ask unanimous consent on each of those, Mr. Chairman.
So added. Thank you. Well, let me just thank our witnesses for being here today. I do want to, before I jump into the tax thing, I do want to mention one point. We've talked about debt in the next 10 years, 2.3 ideally in added debt. We've had $10 trillion in added debt in the last 10. Nobody brought that up much. We've had 1% growth in the last 10, the slowest growth in 50 years. So to keep doing what we were doing was going to clearly put us into bankruptcy. So I want to mention, everybody's got a different background that they bring to this, but I was in business for 30 years, a blue-collar family, started a small business, my wife and I, in '76, a small printing company. We built that company up over a lot of years. But I can just tell you, I'm also a cyclist, and it makes a big difference if you got the wind at your face or the wind in your back. There's a mindset now in Florida and a lot of other places that, Washington's with us now in terms of reducing some of the regulations, not all of them, but also in terms of tax reform. But when you talk about corporations, one thing, my thing that I'm so passionate about is small businesses. If you look at them, they're going to have a substantial reduction up to 25% when you add it all up. But just as important or more important for a lot of small businesses is full expensing. New and used equipment. Instead of writing it off over 5 or 7 years, that's going to make a huge difference. So I just see the mindset. You're going to be able to keep more of what you earn so you can redeploy that, whether it's buying equipment, expanding your businesses. And then two things just looking at anecdotally. I mean, when the economy is growing right now 3.5%, we had 1.5%, and you look at, and I can tell you in our area, I can't tell you how many job sites and other things, they can't find workers. So we're almost at full employment, at least in Florida. So those are two gigantic, it's almost overheated, the economy in Florida. People are very bullish down there. So let me ask again, as we talk about lowering rates and full expensing, what does that mean to your business today and going forward? And someone mentioned something about the spirit of the tax cuts and the psychology, to some extent, of the tax cuts, what that means to your businesses. Mr. Horn, could you lead off?
Well, as I said in my testimony, it's important for our cash flow. If we can recoup that immediately, it's important for us to be able to put the money back in. It helps us tremendously. And the bonuses I gave, I doubt they stayed in their banks long. They were back in the economy pretty quickly. I mean, people were glad to have some extra money in their pockets. So I know that it's putting back into the economy that way as well.
Again, anecdotally, I hear it from almost everybody. That's why it's so different than what's been said here, at least in Florida. I can't talk about all the other states, but people are very bullish. Mr. Gray, what about the psychology of where we're at with tax cuts and the reality of that as well?
I see a huge increase. I live in a little town I live south of Salem, Missouri, and I also have a practice in Rolla. And if you just drive through the towns, you will see more construction. You will see, I've got clients in construction that cannot get qualified, skilled employees in my office with bonuses, with retaining an employee. I also saw an uptick of matching under the retirement account, even in our own firm. So it's a whole attitude. My employees are picking up new business because it's kind of how it's an attitude. And the more you show that attitude to your employees, in my case to my clients, the more they're engaged and more that money circulates in a small local community.
And the other thing, what I found, we go through these heated economies, and that's what I think we're going to be getting into, where you have fewer workers to pick from. You know, if you need those workers, you're going to have to pay more. So I think you're going to see rising inflation, or however you want to look at it, wages for a lot of our employees. That's just the truth. If you run a law firm, you need a paralegal, and there's not many of them out there, you're either going to step up and pay another $10,000 or you're going to do without. Mr. Bach?
I think the great word and the one that really matters is attitude. And as much as things have to be fact-based, and in the end that's what the foundation is, when people are seeing positive things, it reflects on their attitude. Attitude's infectious. It's creating growth. I see positive at every level that we touch, both on the supply and customer side, and it's going to be great here for a while.
Yeah. Mr. Holman, anything you want to add?
Yeah, in terms of reading the tea leaves, I generally, refer to my customers because that's where I would get my indicator. And if I could, put in a shameless plug for them, the railway industry, unlike the roads in this country, self-fund all of their own infrastructure. And by their nature, they're capital intensive. So for this bill to allow my customers to make those significant investments in their capital with a greater degree of confidence, which is what I'm seeing, that confidence then transfers to me. I can get a little bullish about my business plans, and therefore that confidence then translates into the folks that I buy from. So I would agree with your assertion that it is, the economy is almost in an overheated situation.
And let me just say, we just completely, unfortunately, disagree in terms of it's not having much of an impact in small businesses. I'd ask you to come to Florida, talk to a lot of people that are there, small, medium-sized businesses. They're very bullish, and it's making a big difference in our area. Our problem is we don't have enough people in terms of jobs. That's the reality that I hear every day. I chaired the Florida Chamber and a local chamber, and I can tell you, and I talk with them occasionally on different things, and they're very bullish about it. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for appearing before us today. Please be advised that members will have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Vern.